All right, let's do it. So, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's great to finally meet you. This is how we meet each other nowadays. This is the only way, almost, we meet each other nowadays. So, why don't you tell me a little bit about yourself and your organization and what you're passionate about?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Thanks for having me on. So my name is Raphaelle Moatti. I am the founder of Delicious.future, which is a new organization dedicated to a brighter, more positive future of food. We're a collective, actually, of veteran innovation consultants and chefs and gatherers, essentially. And we have this strong hypothesis that's becoming more and more proven that it is through experience that people will get really awakened and also excited about the future of food. And essentially, I believe there are many future of foods that are possible, and that we are today at a very specific moment, almost like an unprecedented time, where we essentially have all the elements for the future of food to be much more just and much more nutritious and more regenerative than what we've had, and all the issues that we know about the current food system. So the question is, how do we foster that? How do we push forward, both from the industry side and from the consumer side, so that this more positive and participatory and inclusive future really happens?
I love it. I also love the name. I think the name is fantastic. Can you tell me a little bit about like what drove you to do this? I mean, are you one of the founders, or maybe you can tell me
Sure.
about what the founders?
Yes, I am. Yeah, so actually, most of my career I spent in digital health and working most of the time in innovation roles, strategy roles, creating new products and services around health. And some of it like hardcore healthcare, and some of it more wellness, but almost all of it essentially like personalized in some ways. And I've been essentially using digital tools my entire career to figure out how we can change behaviors for the better around health. And of course, there's also a lot of lifestyle changes that you can make, right, to like either improve a condition, improve symptom management, or simply like actually preventing diseases. And most recently, actually, I was working within Intel on a startup, and one of the things actually that was so exciting for me was actually that we were bringing together the quantified side of the body and body measurement with a whole service around behavior change to help people essentially like accompany them on their journey towards better health. And that's really been like it's been on my mind since then. And I recently joined a program called the Design Science Studio, which is part of the Buckminster Fuller Institute, a group of 144 artists and designers are picked to be part of this really awesome program that essentially is a launch board for projects around regeneration, essentially bringing to life Bucky Fuller's heritage and his vision around like a future that can work for 100% of life. And so I would not consider myself an artist in any way, and designer is already like, I feel is a very I humbly call myself a designer. and so yeah, so Delicious Future came essentially from this, because I really wanted to figure out like, how do I bring together all these things that I love to do, which is bringing people together from different disciplines or different walks of life, essentially. I'm French American, but I'm also from two different backgrounds in France, and it's kind of been, it's part of my DNA. It's always been something that I've always done, like essentially bridging people that are of different kinds. And so how do we bring this together with this notion of like flipping the script around the future of food, the script that's been so far very like doom and gloom, or very sort of pessimistic and dystopian, to a much more positive narrative, so people can really envision what it can be like. And beyond imagining, I think that learning through experience and really experiencing through your senses what that can be like is much more powerful than any kind of lecture, any kind of ad, any kind of anything you can read. But if you can taste that the future can be delicious, but also regenerative for the planet, and also nutritious for your body, and also benefits your community, how could you possibly say no? So
yeah, there's no reason why you can't do all three, right? I mean, right now we haven't been doing all three, but there's no reason why you can't, right?
That's right. And actually, on the opposite, it's like no reason that we can't, and actually all the reasons that we can. And so that's what I think is really exciting today. And so we've started with Delicious Future, we started a series of gatherings called Future Feasts. We've had already a couple, and the next one is in a couple weeks, actually in San Francisco, around the Future Food Tech Conference. And what these are really a matter of showcasing regenerative foods through menus that are created by acclaimed chefs. So the first one we worked on with an amazing chef and author and artist named Maria Finn, who created a whole menu called for this dinner called the Wild Coast, where she foraged herself a lot of ingredients and also fished some of them, and like educated people around the types of oysters that we were serving and all these things. And it was essentially sold out, and it was our first dinner, and it was super exciting. And we had like an incredible—
Fantastic. Congratulations.
Thank you. It was an incredible turnout in terms of the quality of people and really like the broad range. And that's really a lot of the feedback we've gotten, is like the quality of the conversations, the energy in the room, and really like all the sort of the collaborations that are, starting to happen, just because people are excited to meet and excited to sort of have this common vision to work towards. So yeah, and I think a lot of it too is that I think that there's so much noise out there. I mean, so if you talk to people about like anything related to nutrition, the way you choose a certain diet, it's so complex. It's, so multifaceted. But today there's also, I feel like, this aspect of, at least in certain circles, a sense of shame and guilt that we're not doing enough, that we're not doing enough, and that we could do more, but we don't really necessarily know how. And so a lot of what we're striving for, and that really drives us, is this notion that you can actually empower people with their choices 3 times a day to feel like they have agency around their individual action, for the planet. And I'm not naive. I understand it's not like one person that's going to make a difference. Even if like a very large number, but I think that even if it's not even just the fact that people would eat different things, it's also actually the outlook, the positive outlook, and that opens up new possibilities, is incredibly contagious and incredibly like it's a virtuous cycle.
Yeah, it's amazing how people feel that it's so disconnected from your emotion, but the emotion is a huge part of well-being, of wellness.
Of course. Yeah, definitely. And I think that's a lot of, I mean, I could talk about this all day, but there's so much.
That's fine, go ahead.
The way that you experience food in your body, but really also the appreciation that you have. And so for sure, that's the French woman in me speaking, but also the mom, and also, the hostess, I guess, when I have dinners over at my house. but I think it's also, you know, when I know someone who actually I admire, like, he's a very, very spiritual person, who was telling me about how she grows parsley on her windowsill. And before she picks it, she asks the parsley for permission. And then when she eats it, she really sort of has this moment of gratitude for what, you know, this plant that she's nurtured is now going to give her and help create her the new cells that are creating the new her. And so, without being completely esoteric and, you know, really abstract here, I just think, like, it's such a different relationship suddenly to food and to your body and to how you yourself have this relationship with your environment, whether it's your local environment, like on your windowsill, literally, or your more, you know, your community.
Yep.
And more broadly, of course, like, you know, the planet as your community.
So how does this instantiate himself? I mean, I think all of us would prefer to eat better, right? Better foods, better for the planet, like all around, better for everyone. How does it instantiate itself? I mean, you were talking a little bit earlier about the quantified self. Does that come into it as well? I mean, do you analyze what's best for an individual to eat and then come up with foods specifically for them, like a customized plan, which also fits into all these other categories, or how does that work?
Yeah, thank you for that question. So we're not quite there yet to doing personalized recommendations. I'm not sure if we will get there, because I think for us it would be more interesting to partner with people that do this kind of work, that I definitely have worked with before. So it's exciting to bring them on. Because the idea with Delicious Future is really to create a network of innovators through the entire food system. Because I think the question that you asked before you finished it, it was interesting, because I was thinking, how does that even happen? Because the food system is so complex and so large and so multifaceted and all that. And yes, it is. And at the same time, when you speak with I was at Expo West in LA, for example, last week, which is like a huge gathering of people around natural foods. I mean, this year was not incredibly well attended. There were 60,000 people there. So, you know, and
That's amazing.
right, I mean, their usual is like 90 or 95. So people come from all over the world to discover new foods or foods that are like pre-market, pre-launch, right? But then I think one of the things you notice when you go to, you know, trade shows like this is the variability in terms of quality and in terms of even, I would say, philosophy and sort of way forward, right? I mean, you have essentially people that do very incremental innovation. You have people that do things that are really out there and that are really really trying to essentially do a one-for-one replacement. For instance, with plant-based or cell-grown ingredients or foods that can really replace what we're used to eating, but without the animal, right? So when you can get there, when you can get to something where not only does it taste great, and sometimes blind tests show that it tastes better. The Better Meat Company, for example, has done this research, and so when people like when it's like it tastes better and at the same time, or at least as good, right, and it looks really good, and now you have this notion of nutritionally it's like, you know, similar or the same or maybe better because something that has maybe less, you know, sugars or fats or, you know, what have you. And so I think there's just an incredible actually amount of opportunity in this sense. So not so much necessarily for I mean, how do I say this? So yeah, so let me go back to your question, because it's really important. I think part of what you're asking is, how do you quantify how regenerative or how nutritious something is for somebody? And that's actually one of the first things that we did at that very first dinner, is start actually identifying all the key ingredients that were in the menu, and share with the guests their nutritional value, but also their ecosystem services. So in other words, their benefit for the environment and for the community. So I'll give you an example. We served a specific type of oysters called Olympia oysters, and that used to be very prevalent around the San Francisco Bay Area, and that are smaller than regular oysters, but they're actually that actually resist better to the rising of water temperatures. So it's really interesting to consider, you know, an increase in those types of oysters right there, you know. And I think what's really interesting is, so for people to understand, like, so what is the, you know, perhaps like carbon capture or like carbon footprint of a specific ingredient, or, you know, who is it farmed by, like, or where does it come from? So that's a lot of what we're really looking to do, is really to help essentially reduce confusion and bring really a lot of more, I guess, systematic and methodical approach around all of these, you know, these elements. And so we have a number of projects around that with some academic folks. And so yeah, so for me, this has been central since the beginning, because I believe that the experience that we take people through is one thing, but I think that then it gets really reinforced, you know, by all that knowledge, and it's really participates in that paradigm shift.
Excellent. So you mentioned something earlier that I wanted to drill down a little bit on. You said I think it was like cell generated foods, and then plant-based. And I'm thinking, aren't those like totally diametrically opposed ways of doing things? Because one is almost like you're constructing something out technologically, and the other one is you're just sort of growing plants in a certain way. I mean, how do you reconcile those two visions in the same group?
Well, thank you for that question, actually, because that's a lot of what we want to do, is be non-dogmatic essentially, and show that the future of food needs to be regenerative and nutritious and benefit the community. But it doesn't mean that it has to be entirely vegan. It doesn't mean that it has to be completely low tech or completely high tech. I think the beauty and that really incredible moment that we find ourselves in is that actually all of these things are opening up. And so all of these possibilities are possible, and they can all coexist, because there's not one future of food. There's going to be multiple future of foods, right? I mean, like today, there's multiple ways of people to eat. So I think there's like when there's, you know, there's essentially like a revolution in an industry or a field, there's different pace at which different, you know, aspects of it come to life. And what's possible to do with lab-grown meats or, you know, yeah, cell-generated type foods is quite different also in terms of nutritional profile than what can be done that's plant-based today. And it depends, because plant-based can also mean a lot of things. And that's the other piece of, I think, the confusion today, is that they're like, so it's whole food, but is it plant-based, but it's regenerative? Is it organic? Like, what is this, you know?
I think we have to throw all those terms out the window, because right? they've lost their meaning now. I mean,
absolutely, yeah, exactly. Actually, I was a professor the other day was telling me, like, we should actually come up with a new term, not even food anymore. Like, we should use another word. That's
exactly
this thing that nourishes us and nourishes our environment. And I haven't come up with a good word, so if you have one, I'm all ears. But I think
we'll do some brainstorming and see if we can come up with something.
I think so yeah, so to your point, I think that all of these have a place, and all of these have a place for different reasons, right? So because some of them are going to be very local solutions, and that's one of the things that we really strongly believe in and really want to emphasize and show, is that again, the future of food doesn't have to be the same everywhere. It's more actually, what can you do if you can bring together like ancestral knowledge or, you know, native plants that are made to live in the environment that you are, where you are, with these notions, right, of regen. And so I think the question for me really is like, how, you know, how do we help essentially like foster that change in very different environments? So I live in the San Francisco Bay Area, in complete bubble in terms of, you know, what people look for, want.
Oh yeah, tell me about it.
Right.
we're so disconnected from the rest of the world. It's crazy.
Yeah, and if I, you know, if I go to France, I know, right? Because I was actually at the French consulate in San Francisco the other day, and it was amazing. We had a really fun experience. I presented the guest. Actually, was a French execs from Silicon Valley that came for a climate tech event. And so I served plant-based tuna tartare, but I didn't tell them that it was plant-based. And I had people.
Nice. What was the reaction?
It was actually awesome. It was really so fun. People were blown away. They were like, whoa, really? But what was really interesting, I think that, I mean, I now want to try it with another group, like, you know, I want to try it with American. I want to try it with different, because there were some aspects that I think were so culturally, you know, specific in terms of the questions that people were asking. So I'm really, really curious to see that. But it was super fun. It was great. So
I love it. So if I was like, say, an aspiring food entrepreneur, and I wanted to get into this space, like, what would be the best way for me to do that?
Well, so there are a lot of incubators these days that are specifically focused on food. And it also, again, completely depends on which part of the system you're in. I mean, if you're in ag tech, it's not going to be the same investors as if you do something that's B2B or B2C. That's a final product. You know, I think there's space for innovators in essentially like every domain. I mean, there's, you know, AI and supply chain innovation that's needed, you know, for the future of food to be. And similarly, like there's social innovation that needs to happen too. So it's really broad. Again, it really depends on what you're trying to do. But so there are VCs that are specifically looking at investing in food tech, some that are exclusively doing food tech, and some that are doing food tech plus other climate tech or other investments. And then, you know, there's always, I mean, all the other ways, like there's, you know, there's federal funding when you do research with or in conjunction with a university. There, you know, private equity if you want to go that route. You know, some people bootstrap. Actually, we for our next dinner, we're in 2 weeks, I guess. We have a number of sponsors that are coming on, and that are and not necessarily paid sponsors, but people that want to showcase their foods because they're pre-market. So we're flying this celebrity chef from LA who's just amazingly kind and humble and sweet and photogenic and amazing. And her name is Nicole Dursave, and she also runs actually a program called the Martha Project, where she feeds the houseless community in LA vegan foods once a month. And anyway, so Nicole's come up with a whole menu based on, you know, the different foods that our sponsors, you know, wanted to showcase. So we have like alcohol-free spirits, for example.
Well, that's a huge thing now. What,
right?
do you have any insight into why alcohol-free spirits, or is it the wellness angle, or
I mean, I think
why are those so popular?
The wellness angle, I think, for sure. I think, you know, new taste is interesting to people, and they're curious about that. There's some markets also where, you know, alcohol is not something that can be consumed.
Mm-hmm.
And so I met some people actually at Expo West that were telling me how their primary markets are actually Saudi Arabia, for example. So there's a number of reasons, but yeah, it's really fun to see, you know, like what people are coming up with. You have some very young, like, you know, just graduated from their PhD people that are like just super into it and really want to do it. There's people that are, you know, older like me that have done other things that are like, okay, now is the time I really want to, you know, move that forward. So I think there are loads of opportunities, and in fact I think there's going to be more and more, because it's really starting to it's like stirring. You can feel it, like you can feel in the air, like, and everyone I have been talking to is like super excited about the idea, you know, like, yeah, why wouldn't I do that, right? So the question becomes, and I think to your point, like from an individual standpoint, what does that mean really? What does that mean for me, like next week when I go to the store? Or like, how do I make better choices? Or how do I not eat this box of cookies? That's a different story.
But the box of cookies is good, and it'll make you feel better, right?
Of course, of course. But I think so our standpoint is that we really want to take it from the human-centered perspective, right? We want the human and the human experience to be at the center of all of these gatherings that we do. So right now we're doing these small ones, but we're also planning much larger ones that are also very much about showcasing, showing, and people to taste and try. And even like, for example, like I don't know how to cook pea protein based eggs, you know, that are like for scrambled eggs.
That's a thing. I've never even heard of that. What do they look? Do they look like real eggs?
Yeah, they do. They do look like scrambled eggs, and they taste good. And we're probably going to showcase them actually in an upcoming event. But anyways, it doesn't cook the same way exactly as, you know, as eggs would. So it's like, I want to try. I want to know how that works, right? So I think there's just tons of educational opportunities, but that can be done like in really fun ways, that can be done in ways that are just like, you know, again, exciting for the community to participate in. And personally, and maybe that is also my French background, but I believe like there's a huge public health, you know, issue or challenge here at stake also.
Oh, absolutely. I agree 100%.
Yeah. And so that also is like, you know, when people say we can't be thinking, you know, so short term anymore, and we need to really like look beyond profits, and, you know, it doesn't have to be mutually exclusive with other benefits, right? But yeah, thinking the longer term game, because our bodies also don't change as fast, right? So it's like, if you think of the pace of nature or the pace of our changing bodies, you know, what you eat today isn't going to be like, I mean, yeah, it's, sorry, I lost my train of thought now.
That's okay. I think I mean, that I have that same issue. It's like you keep thinking that what you're eating today is going to affect you tomorrow, but it affects you, you know, days, weeks in the future. And it's almost like the human beings can't really think that far out. It's like, I'd rather eat the cupcake today than you know, the kale tomorrow, because at least I know what this tastes like. So
yeah,
in your research, so in your research, have you found that there is sort of like a base level set of ingredients that is regenerative for everyone? So we don't necessarily have to go down the customized food path?
Well, there's certainly some foods that are, I don't know that I can say 100% regenerative for everyone, but there are some foods like seaweeds, different kinds of seaweeds, mushrooms, and hemp, essentially. I mean, all three are like, you know, very easy examples of foods that are very, very clearly benefiting the environment that they grow in, and our bodies as well, and bring us things that we can't get elsewhere. I mean, I've started doing now quite a bit of research on seaweed and different kinds of seaweed. In fact, that our first dinner we had, essentially there was seaweed in every single dish, even dessert. And
I love seaweed. I wish it would be. Is it really? It seems like a miracle food because there's just so much of it everywhere, and it probably has a ton of nutrients. But it hasn't had its moment in the sun yet. I don't know why.
Well, in our Western world, it hasn't, right? But in Asia, it's been like of course, like ubiquitous forever. I mean, there's even like a study that was done. It's a totally incredible story. So like after the bombing in Japan at the end of the Second World War, the Japanese government actually was using inmates and orphans to clean up like nuclear waste, essentially. And they weren't being fed very well. Like they just didn't have enough to eat, essentially. And so they would actually pick seaweed and complement their diet that way. And what happened is, yeah, and I mean, the most interesting is actually that around Hiroshima, a lot of people had, you know, radioactive substances in them, but these people did not, because the seaweeds actually had this protective effect on them. So all those,
wow,
it's incredible. Like
that's amazing.
Yeah, it is amazing. And so seaweed in so many ways for so many things is really, really, really beneficial. We're just not super used to eating it. I mean, you know, perhaps besides sushi, but I believe that there's loads and loads of ways to make that happen. And of course, you know, they grow like weeds because it's seaweed. Right?
Yeah, it's everywhere. My wife is Japanese, so she has seaweed all the time, and we bring seaweed. I love seaweed salad and all sorts of other seaweeds, and it just seems to me that it needs its moment in the sun in the Western world. I mean, I'm sure if I went to Asia or Japan or whatever, I'd be able to have like seaweed steak or something even more substantial than what we're seeing here. But yeah, you know, I wish we'd see more of that.
That's even happening, not even just in Asia. I mean, there was this product actually in the Netherlands. It's a seaweed-based burger, and it's supposed to be.
Well, I would eat that in a second.
Yeah, I know, right? And so I think there's, you know, just with these, it's already super exciting what can be done. I'm not sure if you've heard of this organization in Maine called Green Wave. They've created this really amazing way to do vertical farming in the ocean of kelp and also bivalves, so different kinds of like clams and oysters, right? Because they're symbiotic. And the way that these vertical farms work is that when the kelp needs to be harvested, it's actually lobster fishermen who go and harvest it. And it's so interesting because it's like a whole new stream of revenue for them at moments that it's not lobster season, but it's the same people and the same boats, right? That know the same like currents and the same, you know, parts of the bay and this and that. And so it's just amazing because there's so much you can do. I mean, so besides, of course, like the, you know, the carbon sinks, but, you know, seaweed's used like in pharmaceuticals and in cosmetics and of course, you know, in food and fillers and fuel. And I mean, it's just so many applications. It's unbelievable. And actually that was one of my key questions when I started really digging further into this was, why don't we have this in California? Why don't we have like huge, like, you know, vertical farms of seaweed of the coast of Mendocino? And
exactly, this would be a perfect place for it. I can totally see that here.
Yeah, so, you know, hint hint, we need to get that going. anybody
who's listening who's like, oh, if you need something to get into.
It's super lucrative. It's like ridiculous. Actually, these guys, Greenwave, they really wanted other people to be able to replicate their model. So they've created this whole training system. And last I checked, they had 6,000 people on the waiting list.
Wow. Wow. Well, if I can help invest in something like that, that would be great. Right? I'd love to see something like that. Exactly. I want that seaweed burger.
Right? Definitely. Yep, I'm with you.
So let's talk about the future. It's the year 2032, 10 years from now. What's the future of food going to be like 10 years from now?
Well, that was the question we asked, actually. That's the question we ask all the time. Again, I don't think there's one future of food. I think 2032, first of all, it's both far and very, very close. So it's going to come very fast. So I think some of the things, I mean, the future isn't, it is for sure, but it's even not only that, it's like when there are multiple futures, it's definitely, everyone at their own pace. And I think that's one of my hopes, is that actually that the future of food really is more geared towards actually community building, and really bringing like, not necessarily bringing humans in the center, like, like before the Copernicus revolution, but really saying like refinding our place in, in the ecosystem that we live in. And I think that there's something really powerful when you think about like the possibilities of food as an equalizer in terms of racial and social justice. And that's one of the things that's really made me want to work on this more, is like some public health studies. Like, for example, there's one that was done, I think it was Johns Hopkins, I want to say. And they had actually looked at life expectancy based on your zip code. And it was just like, essentially there was like a 25-year difference between zip codes that are essentially adjacent to each other.
Wow. And what was the difference between the zip codes? Like, what was it, a demographic or?
Yeah, it's demographic, it's, it's social demographic, it's economic opportunity, it's all of these things, right? And so that's not okay, essentially. No. So, and I think that it's
were you able to find like a difference in the types of foods that they ate in the each demographic? Like, is this?
There wasn't part of the study, but like you can extrapolate that pretty easily. And also, I mean, it's a matter of like, of course, accessibility and availability, right? Besides everything that has to do with like the cultural and the community and the social aspect of food. So if you go to a neighborhood, like, I mean, you go to West Oakland or East Oakland, in places where there's, there are literally food deserts, you can't find anything fresh. So even if you want to, you can't. You're not going to drive half an hour for a salad. I mean, I doubt it, And so that's the thing. Like, so that's the piece that makes me very excited. So for me, the future of like 2032, we're going to see in this next decade a lot of small local leaders that are gonna start growing food, in our neighborhoods. Like you know about edible, sidewalks and these kinds of projects that have happened, kind of popped up all over the world. I really hope, and I think that this is gonna happen more, because people are excited and there's more awareness, and there's just it just feels great. Like if you eat your own tomatoes, they don't taste like anything that you've ever tried before. And there's something so like both simple and powerful in eating food that you've grown. So I think that's going to be really interesting to see. So for me,
those are huge cultural barriers, though. How do you get food like that into these food deserts? I mean, how do you get past the situations that they're in now? I mean, like, is it local farming and?
Yeah, you'd be surprised. There's actually a lot of initiatives these days. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of things, a lot of attention, thankfully, on African-American farmers and ancestral ways of stewarding the land and things like that. And there's also a lot of, I think, more awareness and interest in indigenous practices. There's, a lot of sort of, I guess, a lot of different voices that are being heard from different communities. And so if you're asking, like, how are we going to make people grow their own food? I think, I mean, it's always a matter of incentives. It's always a matter of like, what's in it for me. But in a way, I kind of want to ask, like, what's not in it for you? Mm-hmm. And nobody wants to feel like they're being left behind. And I think, that's one of the things that really excites me, is this notion of like, we want to make this future of food so exciting that, everyone wants in, essentially.
Yeah. Well, I mean, when you think about growing your own food, you just think it's a lot of work and it needs a lot of space. But I'm assuming that that's not the case, right? There is technology that can
Yeah.
solve that problem.
Well, so there's technology, so you can, buy expensive technology where you can grow your own foods in your house, in your kitchen. There's a ton of different things. But there's also like not very high-tech technology, right? That
Well, yeah,
can
I've seen
work.
those. I've seen those like cupboards. It's like a cupboard that has hydroponic lamps and stuff like that. I'm sure that there's sort of like low
Yeah,
tech versions
for
of the
sure.
same thing. Yeah.
And that you're talking about like growing indoors, but even growing outdoors, there's tons of things that, tons of ways that you can do it on very, very small spaces,
Hmm.
and with limited resources. And I think that's the other piece is like, I don't know if you've ever had early girl tomatoes, for example. They're
Oh
just
yeah, they're really good.
incredible. And they only, how they're grown? They're only watered like when the plant first grows, and then that's it. And that's why they're so rich. The taste is so rich and nutritious, and they're small. They're not
Mm.
like huge and watery. They're like small and really like concentrated, right? And you can feel it when you eat them. Anyway, so like that's just exciting in terms of like uh, what you can get again from a taste profile, but also just because you don't need as much water, and it's again, I think it's just part of this huge paradigm shift. It's so interesting. The presidential elections are coming up in France pretty soon, and so there's a lot of conversations around that. And I just saw this morning how there's a group, I mean, students essentially are all getting together and saying, none of you 12 candidates are addressing things that actually matter to us. And what matters to us is taking care of our planet and our environment and our purchasing power. We don't care about a lot of the other things that you guys think we still care about. That's not true. And these are this is the new generation. And I mean, maybe we're in a new, 68. I don't know, but there's just like, yeah, this paradigm shift is happening. And so the question is like, do you want to fight it, or do you want to bring something positive through it?
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely can see that happening. But you know what I'd love to see? I'd love to see food being social again. Because a lot of what's happened nowadays is that people just see it as sustenance, right? The whole, oh, I'm just going to drink some Soylent, or I'm gonna sit at my desk and have my sad desk lunch and things like that. If we could just return to a time before when we actually respected people's time to go eat, and time to be social, and time to sort of disconnect from work for a bit, and remake those connections. And I think we've lost a lot of that we used to have.
Yeah, I mean, I like that you're saying that it's something that's been lost. I think it's been lost in certain cultures. I think in some cultures it's still very present.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I don't think that the future of food or the future of eating has to look like some kind of, dystopian science fiction version of everything. Right?
I'll take my pill for lunch, right?
Exactly. I mean, the joy of getting together, that's a huge thing. And that's actually why we started our gatherings as that, we called them feasts, because we want people to and that's really the energy we're trying to get, right? Like different people of very different kinds. I mean, like, VCs and farmers and social activists, and chefs and entrepreneurs together, right? Like I think that's where, and it's really interesting. And yeah, of course, I mean, there's so many different ways to be social around food. It's yeah, I think there's a lot of possibilities there for sure. I don't know,
Fantastic.
to bring back or bring new and bring back at the same time.
Yeah, I love it. So if somebody wants to get take part and help the cause, what's the best way for them to contact you? Do they contact you directly, or Are there other organizations?
Definitely. I mean, you can write to me at Raphaelle@delicious.future.com for sure. On our website, there's also a contact us page. You can find us on LinkedIn. You can find us kind of anywhere social, I guess. And yeah, we're looking for partners. We're looking for different kinds of partners today. People that want to be involved in the growing of the organization, but more so people that have their own organization and that want to, work with us because they believe that we have a similar vision. And it's actually been very, very cool to see, people, how they're receiving this message and this sort of mission. And we're very excited to be like growing the vision with people of, of different kinds. Like we're talking to folks who have done like huge festivals, for example. And that's something that, that's super fun and exciting to do. But we're also talking to people that are more like doing things for like public entities. And I think all of these have a place. So I think the whole beauty and the whole richness and value is to bring all of those voices.
I love it. I love it. It's fantastic. Well, thank you so much. It's been great talking with you. And this is very exciting. Our future is going to be very delicious.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Bye-bye.